Okay, we've talked about a market with perfect competition. Now we'll talk about its opposite, a monopoly market. First, we'll talk about how monopolies form. Then once the monopoly forms, we'll talk about how it will have choices about quantity and price. So click on the video button to watch the information about monopolies on the next slide. Okay, uh, pause the video and then copy the YouTube address down below, and then go to YouTube and watch the video. And then when you're through, why come back to this video at this slide. Okay. Here's an example of political power from a cotton monopoly. In the year 1860, the United States, the southern states, had a near monopoly in the cotton supplied to Great Britain. These states attempted to leverage this economic power into political power and tried to sway Great Britain to formally recognize the Confederate States of America. The Southern cotton producers were able to dominate worldwide cotton production because the climate was ideally suited to cotton growth, and the cotton merchants colluded to control shipments to the British textile manufacturers. So, what are monopolies and how do monopolies form? A monopoly example is a pharmaceutical firm that produces all of a drug's output in a market. An example of a barrier to entry is the way Hewlett-Packard, HP, controls the market for its printer cartridges. Natural monopolies exist when there's a very high cost of entry. For example, it would be very expensive to duplicate the Truckee water delivery pipes owned by the Truckee Public Utility District. And an example of a legal monopoly is the National Football League and the Major League Baseball group. Natural monopolies can arise, one, in industries where the marginal cost of adding an additional customer is very low, once the fixed costs the overall system in place. This is like the fixed costs of a public utility district water system are very high, but the additional costs are lower. Or two, in smaller local markets for products that are difficult to transport. Or three, when a company has control of a scarce physical resource. Now, pause the video and go to Canvas under this week's lesson, discussion 9.1, and discuss what are some examples of natural monopolies in Truckee. When you finish that, why then come back and start the video again. Okay, let's talk about economies of scale and the natural monopoly. In this market shown below, the demand curve intersects the long-range average cost curve at its downward sloping part. So a natural monopoly occurs when the quantity demanded is less than the minimum quantity it takes to be at the bottom of the long-run average cost curve. The arrow shows the point the demand begins to be less than the long-range average cost curve. That's about 4,000 units. Above this point, price is greater than the long-run average cost curve, and companies are profitable. Below that point, price is below the long-range average cost curve again, and firms would lose money. So we'll talk about legal monopolies first. And many times the government creates barriers to entry by prohibiting or limiting competition. And some of the examples of legal monopolies are the U.S. Postal Service and utilities, electric, water, garbage, other utilities. Legal monopolies can be useful because they can promote innovation. A patent, a U.S. utility patent, covers the creation of a new or improved and useful product. That could be a product, process, or machine. It is generally granted for 20 years from the date the patent application is filed. However, periodic fees are required to maintain the enforceability of that patent. The second is a U.S. trademark. They generally last as long as a trademark is used in commerce and defended against infringement. And the third area is a copyright protection. It is a limited term for works created after January 1st, 1978. Copyrights last for 70 years after the death of the author. For works made for hire, covering the usual types of work owned by a small business, the copyright lasts for a term of 95 years from the year of its first publication, or a term of 120 years from the year of its creation, whichever expires first. The Walt Disney Corporation lobbied for these rules to protect its cartoon characters and movies. And lastly, a trade secret can be protected indefinitely as long as the secret is commercially valuable. Its value derives from the fact that it is secret and the owner takes reasonable precautions to maintain its secrecy. So to promote innovation, we have intellectual properties, which we talked about: patents, trademarks, copyrights, trade secret laws that protect the right of investors to produce and sell their inventions. This implies ownership over an idea, concept, or an image, and not a physical piece of property. Deregulation is a way of removing government controls over setting prices and quantities in certain industries. Here's a deregulation example. The process of drug development is uncertain and expensive. There can be some deregulations and changes in regulations that can be changed that would reduce the cost of drugs. There are many ways to reduce both the cost, the risk of failure, and the cost of innovation. Don't require allowing drug companies to charge exorbitant prices. In 1981, for example, Congress created tax credits to offset research costs. And in 2000, Medicare began covering medical expenses for patients in clinical trials. More recently, regulations have been introduced to speed drugs through the FDA's review process, which can save companies hundreds of millions of dollars. Also, there are regulations that prevent Medicare from negotiating drug prices. So summing up barriers to entry, and here we have 5 examples. One barrier to entry is certainly a natural monopoly. The government often responds with some regulation, so an example would be water and electric companies. Water companies are usually owned by governments. Another would be control of a physical resource. And here, the government really doesn't have a role here. But De Beers in the diamond market has control of the production of diamonds coming out of Africa. And it owns the land and it owns the mines. And it's done very, very well. Then there's a legal monopoly. We talked about that a little bit before, how the government has a role there, post office. And then there were regulations of airlines and trucking. Then patents, trademarks, and copyrights. Yeah, these are important. The government does have a role because they protect all of these as intellectual properties. And examples here are maybe new drugs or a software program or the like. And finally, a barrier to entry could be intimidating potential competitors. Usually this is illegal, so the government gets in somewhat when they see that something really bad is happening. And predatory pricing could occur, or sometimes there's just a well-known brand name, and everybody wants to go to the brand name rather than the generic. Okay, let's talk about intimidating potential competition. And that's really called predatory pricing. A firm uses a threat of sharp price cuts to discourage competition. And it's a violation of U.S. antitrust laws, but difficult to prove. So let's talk a little bit more about predatory pricing. It's a pricing strategy in which a company prices a product or service artificially low to gain new customers. drive competitors out of the market, or create barriers to entry for new potential competitors. In many cases, a company is pricing its product below cost to drive out a competitor. A prime example of predatory pricing tactics was between two large franchises that can be seen in the prescription drug war between Walmart and Target in Minnesota. Walmart, seeking to undercut the competition, initially began offering certain prescription drugs at well below its price floor. This was set by the government. A price floor is the lowest price that goods or commodities can be legally sold, and based on the minimum cost at which turning a profit is still possible. Target, looking not to be undercut, matched those drug price cuts. However, Minnesota state law forbids the sale of drugs below their stated cost and limited the discount, thus putting an end to the price war. So in this section, we'll discuss how a profit-maximizing monopoly chooses output and price. And monopolists can charge any price for its product, but the demand for the firm's product constrains this price that they have. Because the monopolist is the only firm in the market, its demand curve is the same as the market demand curve. This slide shows the difference between the flat curve of a perfect competitor and the sloping demand curve of a monopolist. In a graph, a perfectly competitive firm's demand curve is flat. The flat shape means that the firm can sell either a low quantity or a high quantity, all at exactly the same price. As you remember, perfect competitors' demand curves are always flat. While monopolists face a downward sloping demand curve, they have some choices to maximize profit. Here you can see that a monopolist's demand curve is the same as the market demand curve, which for most goods is downward sloping. So if the monopolist chooses a high level of output, QH, over to the right, it can charge only a relatively low price. Conversely, if the monopolist chooses a low level of output, it can then charge a higher price. The challenge for the monopolist is to choose a combination of price and quantity that maximizes profits. In this example, the monopolist could produce at a much higher quantity than 4 and still make money, but the firm makes the most money at the point where the marginal cost equals marginal revenue. That would be 4 units. Here we see in the graph that beyond the quantity of 4, the average cost is increasing. So the highest total profit of $800 occurs at a quantity of 4, where the average cost is furthest from demand. And you can see again how the equations work. Total cost is simply the quantity times the average cost, or $2,800. Total revenue is simply the price times the demanded quantity, or $3,600. And total profit is simply the difference between the total revenue of $3,600 and the total cost of $2,800. Here we see that total revenue for the monopoly firm called Health Pill first rises and then falls. This really follows the pattern of the demand curve itself, which is curves down because of diminishing utility. So the low levels of output bring relatively low total revenue because the quantity is low. And high levels of output bring relatively less revenue because the high quantity pushes down the market price. Here the total cost curve is upward sloping, the total revenue curve sloped up and then begin to slope down. So let's talk about what's going to happen. How would the company come up with a quantity that's needed? So here, profits will be highest at the quantity of output where the total revenue, 4 units, it is most above total cost. So a profit maximizing level of output is not the same as a revenue maximizing level of output, which should make sense because profits take cost into account and revenues don't. Okay, pause the video again and go to this YouTube address shown here. And then after you've watched the video, then go back to this video and start it again. Thank you. Here we see that the price per pill is 50 cents and is the point that marginal revenue, that is MR, equals marginal cost, MC. But at this quantity, the monopolist can charge a much higher price of $12.50 because there's no competition to force the price down. So profit maximization for a monopolist can be achieved by selling the product at the price where the quantity equals the demand curve and not the lower price where MC equals MR. Now let's watch the video to see more about this big markup. Okay, stop the video and then go to YouTube using this ULR that's at the bottom of this video. After you've watched this video, then come back here and restart the video. Okay? Okay, in the real world, a monopolist often does not have enough information. It can't analyze its entire total revenue or total cost curves. The firm doesn't know exactly what would happen if it were to alter production dramatically. However, a monopolist often has fairly reliable information about how changing input by small or moderate amounts will affect its marginal revenue and marginal costs. And marginal profit would be the profit of one more unit of output, computed as marginal revenue minus marginal cost. For most monopolies, the marginal cost curve is not flat, but upward sloping. In this case, the point that marginal revenue equals marginal cost is the point of maximum possible profit. So like for a monopoly like Health Pool, you see where marginal revenue decreases as it sells additional units of output. The marginal cost curve also is upward sloping. So the profit maximizing choice for the monopoly will be to produce at the quantity where marginal revenue equal marginal cost. If the monopoly produces a lower quantity, then marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost at those levels of output, and the firm can make higher profits by expanding output. If the firm produces at a greater quantity, then marginal cost could be less than marginal revenue, and the firm can make higher profits by reducing its quantity of output. So here you see the point of 5 where the maximum possible profit could be made. Using the same marginal revenue and marginal cost curves, the average cost curve and the demand curve are added here. The health pill firm first chooses a quantity where marginal revenue equal marginal cost at 5. The monopolist then decides what price to charge by looking at the demand curve it faces. The large box with quantity on the horizontal axis and demand, which shows the price on the vertical axis, shows total revenue for the firm. So if you multiply quantity of 5 times it's probably around 750. That gives you the total revenue of that particular firm. Here, the lightest shaded box, which is the quantity on the horizontal axis, and the average cost of production on the vertical axis, shows the firm's total costs. The large total revenue box minus the smaller total cost box leaves the darkly shaded box that shows total profits. Since the profit charge is above the average cost, the firm here is earning positive profits. Okay, here are some steps to follow if you are working for a firm that has a monopoly market. Step 1, you as a monopolist would determine its profit maximizing level of output. That would be essentially where the Marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. You then decide what price to charge at that profit maximizing level. Then you calculate the total revenue, the total cost, and the profit. Now let's do steps 1 and 2. Step 1, the monopoly chooses the profit maximizing level of output, Q. You see Q down there on the graph. You choose the point where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. And you see that point? Okay. Then the monopoly then decides how much to charge at output level Q by drawing a line straight up from Q1 to point R on the demand curve. And you can see way up there, so there is a price of P1. Okay. Now let's do step 3. And here the monopoly identifies its profit. The total revenue will be the quantity multiplied by the price. The total cost will be the quantity multiplied the average cost from your average cost curve. And that shows, that point shows where the average cost curve is P2, that's your cost, P2, and profits will be the difference between P1 and P2, that big shaded cost, total cost, rectangular, okay? Now, got it. So the monopolist has a marginal revenue curve that slopes down faster than the demand curve. And because the market demand curve is conditional, the marginal revenue curve for a monopolist lies beneath the demand curve. The demand curve is not sequential. It's not the first we sell Q at a higher price and then we sell Q2 at a lower price. Rather, a demand curve is conditional. If we charge a higher price, we would sell Q1. If instead we charge a lower price on all units that we sell, we would sell Q2. So to understand a monopolist's demand curve is conditional, think about increasing the quantity along the demand curve by 1 unit. So that you take one step down the demand curve to a slightly higher quantity, but a slightly lower price. A demand curve is not sequential. It's not that we first sell Q1 at a higher price and then we sell Q2 at a lower price. Rather, a demand curve is conditional. If we charged a higher price, we would sell Q1. If instead we charge a lower price on all units that we sell, we would sell Q2. Okay, now let's look at the allocative efficiency that produces the optimal quantity of some output, the quantity where the marginal benefit to society of 1 more unit just equals the marginal cost. This efficiency is not achieved because the price, what product is worth to customers, is above the marginal cost or the opportunity cost of the product. So it's possible that a monopoly is more efficient than many small firms. Economies of scale, such as a natural economy, make monopoly the most efficient market model in some industries. However, inefficiency and rent-seeking costs, lobbying, legal fees, etc., can entail substantial costs and causing inefficiency. Producer surplus is a significant due to the lack of competition. Consumer surplus may be minimized, and this market structure will not contribute to a fair income distribution of our society. Now let's play a video about possible benefits of monopolies. Okay, stop the video and take the YouTube URL that's at the bottom of this slide. Take it over to YouTube, watch the video, Monopoly Benefit, and then after you've watched that, come back here and play the video again, start it again, okay? Okay, Amazon's not a monopoly based on the official definition of a monopoly. Amazon is big, but it only controls 5% of all retail sales in the United States and only 1% globally. Antitrust laws say you're only guilty of monopolization if you attained your monopoly by means other than by providing a better product at a better price. While Amazon has acquired some companies, for example, Whole Foods, almost all their growth has been providing a better product at a better price. Okay, that's all for Monopoly. Review your chapters 8 and 9 and then do quiz 3. It will be available in Canvas after 10 p.m. Tuesday, March the 18th.